Brain Over Binge, the review. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to speak with me, there is a link below. And don't forget to check out my program, The Empowered Eating System. You can enroll today. I read this book probably 2012, 2013 when I was in the depth of my eating disorder. Actually, I wasn't even in the depth at that point. I was going lower and lower, but I could see where it was going, and I was desperately looking for help. And I think Amazon recommended this. So Katherine Hansen was a bulimic in her college years. She was a runner, I believe. The first part is about her story and how she tried to recover and how she started therapy. The second part of the book has most of the meat. It's about what she discovered about the brain and why she had bulimia and why she couldn't stop binge eating and how she recovered. I just want to review some of the main points of the book. There are a lot of points in here. I think I've highlighted over 100 sentences in this book, some key concepts, so I might make a second part. I don't know. I'm going to share what I like and a couple things that I disagree with. So the first thing I like is it challenges traditional therapy. So she took the traditional route. She went to therapists and counselors, and they were always trying to look for, a deeper cause, a deeper meaning. They were trying to find symbolism in her bulimia. They were going back to her childhood. Why are you doing this? Is it a self-esteem problem? And then she realized it wasn't any of that. She didn't have a self-esteem problem. She didn't have emotional trauma. She didn't have problems with her family. None of that was the problem. What she discovered is that she had what she calls a brain wiring problem. So what happened is that she dieted, and she talks about that later in the book. She dieted, and then this triggered survival urges in her brain. She talks about the lower brain and the higher brain, and that lower brain was sending her these powerful urges to consume massive quantities of food. And she realized after many years that it was a survival instinct. Her brain had convinced her that she needed to binge in order to survive. This was a compensatory mechanism. It was a survival mechanism. It was trying to keep her alive because when she had dieted, her brain didn't know it was a diet. All her brain knew is that it was a famine. It detected a famine. It's almost like there's this starvation sensor in the brain, and when you go too low, when you consume too little, it compels you to consume massive quantities of food when it's available. That might have served us well a long time ago when food was actually scarce. Yeah, there was a time in our history when food was scarce. Not anymore. She went on a diet in order to lose weight. It was intentional weight loss. I'm sure she had good intentions. I'm sure she had worthy goals, but that triggered her bulimia. It triggered her eating disorder. And her brain was keeping her alive because it detected a famine. This went on for years and years and years, all the while she was going to therapy and seeing counselors and looking for answers. She stumbled upon an answer, according to her, one day when she went to a bookstore and she picked up a book called Rational Recovery. I should have that here. I think I have it in my storage unit somewhere, but by Jack Trimpey. So she went into this bookstore, she found the book, and then she realized that she could quit whenever she wanted to. So those are two things that I like. I like that she's critical of traditional therapy, and I don't mean to be too critical of therapists. Some of the newer therapists, younger therapists, they have fresher ideas, but there is still this idea that an eating disorder and addiction is a disease, and it needs to be treated, and you need to find the root causes. This is a very old school concept. I don't find it very practical. I don't think she found it practical. In fact, she calls her counselors dishonest in the end because they kept trying to find some root cause within her family or her childhood, and that had nothing to do with her eating disorder. It came down to dieting. And then I also like that she divides the brain into the higher brain and the lower brain. Now, I divide it into 3 parts. I include an emotional brain in there, and I'm going to tell you why that's important in just a minute. So she's struggling with bulimia, and then she walks into a bookstore, finds Rational Recovery by Jack Trimpey, and then she has this revelation, according to her. She reads the book, and then within a few days, or I guess a couple of weeks, she is completely recovered from her bulimia. It sounds a little contrived. I think that's one thing I don't like about it. I'm not saying she's lying, but usually recovery doesn't happen that way. You walk into a bookstore, you have a revelation, you're like, oh, this is all I need to know, and now I'm recovered. But Trimpey has 2 main points. One is that you can recover whenever you want, and then 2, it's not a disease. She didn't have a disease. She didn't have a mental disorder. There was nothing wrong with her brain. What she had done is triggered survival urges, and she created a brain wiring problem. Trimpey was very critical of AA, and he developed his own philosophy of addiction recovery called, I think it was called Rational Recovery, and he talks about the addictive voice. One thing I don't like about Trimpey's approach is that it assumes that you have to be completely abstinent in order to be recovered. Trimpey dealt with alcoholism, he didn't deal with eating disorders, and he believed that you would have to say goodbye to alcohol once and for all, to use his own language. Obviously, you can't say goodbye to food once and for all, but what you can do is say goodbye to those behaviors once and for all. One of her favorite quotes from that book, Rational Recovery, is, "Even if you solve such problems as self-worth, self-awareness, relationships, and childhood conflicts, deprivations, and traumas, you are still left with your original desire to drink." Now, substitute binge eat for drink, and it's the same concept. And he's right. You don't have to solve every problem in your life and live the perfect life and have everything figured out in order to recover. Ultimately, Brain Over Binge is an empowering book because it makes you realize that you don't have a mental disorder or a disease and that you can recover whenever you want. Another point I want to make here is just because you have an urge doesn't mean you have to act on it. And this is one of the central concepts of the book. One, you have to recognize those urges. And then two, you don't have to act on those urges. When you stop acting on the urges disappear. I guess this is one thing I don't like about the book, is that it takes a very neurological, mechanistic approach to eating disorders. It's like, if you have these urges, then you will binge. It assumes that the only reason somebody would binge was because they had an urge to do it. Here's a question that Hansen proposes. If I didn't have the urge to binge, would I binge anyway, just to cope with life? The answer was, of course not. It simply wouldn't make sense. But I think what she ignores is that there are emotions involved. It's not like you just have this survival urge and that's the only reason you binge. I think some people do it because they want to do it, because it makes them feel better. It temporarily removes some emotion from their life. It makes them feel better. It's fun. It's exciting. I think she downplays the powerful effects that those chemicals have in your brain. She downplays the entertainment. She downplays the escape. I'm not saying she's wrong, but I think emotions can play a powerful role in an ED or any sort of addiction. And some people are consciously choosing to do it. It's not just because they have an urge to consume massive quantities of food. They're doing it because it's kind of fun and it's entertaining and it feels good. One thing we know about people is that they will go great lengths to experience pleasure. This is why people drive really fast on public roads. This is why people skydive. This is why people go on roller coasters. This is why people do drugs. They drink, they overeat, they have unprotected sex. We take risks all the time in order to feel good, and binge eating is one more way to feel good. It's kind of fun. It's kind of exciting. And I think that gets ignored in this book. This channel would not be possible without Essetino Artists. Start your YouTube channel and start producing content today. Check out the Creative Business Academy. There is a link below. That some people don't necessarily have a brain wiring problem. They don't have a neurological problem. They have a desire problem. But I do like that she divides the brain into lower parts and the higher part. And when you understand the brain, it's a lot easier to overcome this. I used to think I only had one brain. I didn't understand that there were different parts of the brain. I didn't understand the hindbrain. I didn't understand primordial appetites. I didn't understand that losing weight and dieting could trigger these survival instincts. I think at first a survival instinct could make you binge. I hate to use the word make because it sounds like destiny. But once you become aware, once you have done it a few times, I think the onus is on you. You have to take total ownership of this problem. All right, another good point is recovery and relapse are a choice. I totally agree with this. You can recover whenever you want. You can relapse whenever you want. The chance of relapse is always there, but it's ultimately your choice whether you relapse or not. This is counter to the AA approach or the 12-step approach. You have to count the days. You have to walk on eggshells. You have to be really careful. You have to be really diligent all the time. One day at a time. This isn't true at all. You don't have to live that way. You don't have to wake up every day for the rest of your life and say, am I going to binge and purge today? There's always a chance, but there's always a chance that you could be in a car accident. There's always a chance that something could fall out of the sky and hit you on the head. There's always a chance that you could have a stroke or a heart attack or fall and get a concussion. There's always a chance of everything, but we don't live our lives thinking, what's the worst that could happen today? The same thing is true with ED recovery. You don't have to think, oh, am I going to binge and purge today? There's always that chance. I have to be really careful. I have to keep the stuff out of my home, and I can't buy ice cream, and I can't eat this for the rest of my life. That's a really hard way to live. Just understand that the chance of relapse is always there, but you can minimize that risk, and that's ultimately your choice. Hansen is correct about what the definition of recovery is. It's the complete cessation of binging or purging. And how do you do that? You stop binging and purging. It sounds like a tautology, and it kind of is, but that's how you stop. You don't have to do all of this deeper work. You don't have to find the root causes of what's causing this disorder. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just need to stop acting on those urges. And I would say, I'll go one step further and say, you need to stop acting on those desires. Just because you have a want, just because you have a desire, doesn't mean you should fulfill it. The only way to break this cycle is to stop the cycle at some point. Let me read one thing from the book. That evening in May, this is May of 2005, I stopped believing that my urges to binge were about anything more than food. I began to see that I binge primarily to relieve my cravings and also for pleasure, but certainly not to satisfy some symbolic inner need. What Hansen did was she separated herself from these urges. She separated herself from that lower part of the brain. It's easier said than done because I read this book in 2012 and I didn't really recover until 2018. So that's a long time. It's like 5.5 years after I read this. That's one thing I don't like about this, is that it makes recovery seem so easy. She walked into a bookstore in the spring of 2005. She found Jack Trimpey's book. She read it. She realized there was a higher brain and a lower brain, and then she recovered. For most people, recovery is not so easy. Separating yourself from the lower brain is not that easy. For most people, recovery is going to take weeks, months, sometimes up to a year. It shouldn't take several years. But for most people, recovery is going to be this up and down process. It's not a smooth process. I'm glad that she recovered so fast. I'm just saying that shouldn't be your expectation. It takes a while to rewire or create new habits in your brain. And keep in mind, it's not always urges. Sometimes we do it because we want to do it, because we want to feel good. That's a little harder to do because then you have to change your priorities, you have to change your values, and you have to say no when you want to say yes. And you have to go through a period of deprivation and loneliness. For most people, when they recover, they feel like that something is missing, that there's this void. That's hard to deal with. I'm glad Hansen didn't have to go through that, and I'm not saying she made up this story. You know, I'm not accusing her of anything. I'm glad that her recovery was, so fast. She read a book, she had this epiphany, and everything was good. Good for her. And for some people, it is like that. I'm just saying, for most people, it's not going to be that fast. So how do you stop these cravings? How do you stop the cycle? You stopped acting on those urges. You stopped acting on those desires. You break the cycle. And over time, that cycle becomes weaker and weaker. Again, there's a lot of good points in here. Overall, this is one of my favorite books on addiction and eating disorders. A lot of people have given it positive reviews, and for good reason. It's a well-written book. Hansen is very honest and vulnerable about it. It brings a lot of clarity, and it gives you a different perspective of the brain, and definitely a different perspective of eating disorders. You don't necessarily have to go to therapy. Some people go to therapy and they get success. Great, that's fine. But she takes on this idea that you have a disease, or that you have triggers, or that you can blame your childhood, or you can blame your parents. That's not true at all. And I like that she shows that you can quit whenever you want. That's a really empowering message. I think that's what I like most about this book, is that you can use your own brain and you can use your own thoughts to change your behavior. Have you read Brain Over Binge? Let me know in the comments below. Hope you found this video educational and entertaining. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my free resources below. If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like one of the other videos that you see on the screen. Click one of them and I'll see you there.